April 30th meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission to order. And Secretary Allner, please call the roll.
Commissioner Alcheck. Vice Chair Keller.
Present.
Commissioner King.
Present.
Chair Michael. Commissioner Tanaka. 3 present. Commissioner Alcheck has just walked in. 4 present.
Thank you, and now we can go to oral communications, which is the time when members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda. We don't have any speaker cards, and we have no members of the public. So we will close oral communications, and we can go to Director's report. Perhaps, Amy, is there anything on behalf of Director Gittleman that you would like to report?
I have not been provided with any script, so I would just only say, and I think those are aware, the sidewalk ordinance that was supposed to go on the 21st and then the 29th is actually going on June 2nd, but that's been announced, so you're aware of that. I think we do have representation for that night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So this evening we have 2 topics on our agenda, 2 study sessions. The first is the Grand Boulevard study session. Second is an update on the comprehensive plan amendment and the our Palo Alto initiatives. There was a third item regarding review of the CIP program, which has been moved to the meeting of May 14th at 5 p.m. So with that, let's move to the first study session, which is the Grand Boulevard study session. And recognize Amy French once again.
Thank you. And also recognizing Greg Tanaka has arrived, and so we have a 5-member commission at this point in time. I'm pleased to introduce Michael Garvey, who has over 39 years experience working in and with local government, including helping Palo Alto on the Stanford Medical Center, a recent assignment as Pacifica's interim city manager. And he served as a leader with the California Organization of City Managers, serving as president, and on the League of California Cities Board of Directors. He worked on a number of projects for Bay Area cities and counties since leaving city service in 2006, and he serves as a trustee for the San Bruno Recovery Trust. He also supports the UC Berkeley Senior Executive Training Program for Western United States and is the ICMA Senior Advisor in Northern California. And he is coordinating the Grand Boulevard Initiative, about which the topic this session is. And he's working with a consortium of local governments on the peninsula and South Bay to coordinate the planning. And this covers the Mission Street, El Camino Real, and the Alameda. So take it away, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy, and thank you to the Commission for inviting me here tonight. I'm very pleased to have a chance to come back and to talk with you about this interesting topic. If you don't mind, I'd like to take one quick moment to talk about the Grand Boulevard Initiative, just make sure that everyone's clear on who we are and what we are. Several years ago, 2006, many people involved in transportation in particular were talking about regional problems with mobility and about the importance of El Camino Real and its performance below standard. And I'll explain that in a moment. Ultimately, after some discussion about how you deal with these problems and reflecting that typically what we do in California is we create a new regional agency to oversee such problems. The decision was made not to try and do that, but rather to see if we could do something from the ground up. And so we created something called the Grand Boulevard Initiative. The prime movers at the beginning were Samtrans, led by their executive director, Mike Scanlon, and joint venture Silicon Valley, led by their president and CEO, Russ Hancock. Those two today serve as the co-chair of the effort. There are 19 cities involved. The study area runs from the north end of Daly City to San Jose, approximately at the Diridon station. That's about a block away, but that's where we drew the line. So there's 19 cities involved in 2 counties. There are 2 congestion management agencies, 2 transit districts. VTA, as you know, wears both of those hats in Santa Clara County. Caltrain, Caltrans, BART, Sets, well, let me leave that as the local agencies for right now. ABAG and MTC are also participants, and the Air Quality Management District all come together for meetings quarterly, and it is a round table around which they debate the issues and how they should be dealing with a regional approach. So it's an attempt to preserve local autonomy on the one hand, but on the other hand, to get greater coordination among the plans that the cities are making. What we found interestingly after 8 years of this effort is that the cities are more comfortable in general. They're more comfortable agreeing to put conditions on themselves of their own volition in cooperation with others than they would be if an outside agency were attempting to force it on them. So it's a very interesting experiment. The state and federal government both are fascinated and were often used as examples of what can be done at the local level. The program is called the Grand Boulevard because the intention was to take El Camino Real, the most heavily trafficked street on the peninsula. It has more traffic, it has more public transit resources, it has more residents, it has more businesses than any other single street on the peninsula. And yet it falls short in many ways of what we would hope to see it both aesthetically and in its performance. And so the question is, how can we convert the street into something that we can all be proud of, something that will be beautiful, and something that will support the growth that we anticipate along the peninsula, deal with today's problems, and also mitigate the problems that may be coming through future growth. At this point, I should hasten to say that the measure we're using for future growth is the existing general plans of the 19 cities. That is to say, we never tell anyone what they should do, we only share information. So that, for example, all the projections for Palo Alto are based on your general plan, and as modified by your specific plans and precise plans. We use no numbers unless the City Council has given them final approval. Because of our high profile, we've been very successful getting grants, $8.7 million worth of outside grants thus far. And we have, up to this point, devoted most of our energy to doing studies to determine the present condition of the street. We did one in 2006, existing conditions report, another in 2011, and that was a measure of the progress that we have made. I've been working on this from the beginning, and sometimes friends ask me if I'm still working on El Camino Real, and I always say to them, well, can't you tell? Because the work we're doing is so elementary, so basic. We liken it to building a foundation before the great street can rise above. We'd like to think we're approaching the end of the planning stage, and we're now beginning to turn our focus on getting grants to assist the cities and counties in implementing the plan and building what they're trying to do. Now, I mentioned that there's 19 cities, 2 counties, and a bunch of other agencies. Through the years, that committee called the task force, and every city council has a member on the task force. I think Nancy is your member.
Greg Schmidt, yeah.
Excuse me, yes, it's Greg, I'm sorry. In addition to that, we have a couple of developers, a couple of business owners along the corridor, some environmentalists, and labor representatives. And what we're trying to do is to get everybody at the table to make sure there is some input, and so that we have practical plans. Recently, there's a whole new thrust underway about healthy cities, and recently the 2 public health departments of the 2 counties also requested and were granted seats on the task force. Task force meets quarterly. Monthly, there is a working committee meeting, and Palo Alto has been very active on the working committee as well. So that's kind of the backdrop. You'll be hearing me talk about accommodating future growth, and I would like to make sure that everyone's clear that that future growth is the growth reflected in your general plan, that we have not made assumptions. We've also factored in some growth based on the One Bay Area projections, because they measure regional pressures that are beyond any one city's ability to measure. But the thrust is that we don't tell people what growth they should have. We only accept what you've said and then build from that. As I say, it's a little bit different breed of cat. We have no taxing authority, we have no ability to pass regulations, we have no enforcement authority. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Now, having said that, let me go forward and start to talk about our Complete Streets report. 2 years ago, we received a large grant from the Transportation Improvement Grant from the federal government. It's called TIGER, and that was phase 2. So we received a TIGER 2 grant, one of the largest grants in the entire nation, and we did 3 studies, one of which was an analysis of the infrastructure of the street and what had to be done to upgrade to prepare for the anticipated growth. The second was a study of economic and housing opportunities, and that went into detail with 4 cities as pilot studies, talking about different projections for the future and what growth could bring, and some advice as to cities how they could encourage the sort of development that is already existent in their general plans. Our assumption is that if the cities approved general plan with growth in it, then they actually want that growth. So we have no hesitation trying to talk about how to achieve it. The third part studied was the Complete Streets report. Now, this one's a little bit different. The other 2 were in both counties, but for the Complete Streets report, and this may be why you haven't heard too much about this before, the Complete Streets report is highly duplicative of the work that VTA has been doing on their BRT study. And therefore, the decision was made that we would not include Santa Clara County in this one of the 3 studies. So you'll see as I talk here, there were 4 pilot cities, all in San Mateo County. That was by design. We normally do not stick to one county, but we normally do in both. I mentioned, by the way, that Samtrans and Joint Venture Silicon Valley were the initial sponsors. That is now expanded to 5 sponsors. VTA was added quickly. Ultimately, SamCETA, which is sort of joint venture's counterpart in San Mateo County, was added. And then the Congestion Management Agency in San Mateo County, named the City County Association of Governments, was added. That's called CCAG for short. So we have 5 sponsors. With that as backdrop, and please feel free to stop me at any point if you have questions, let's talk about what we tried to do. First of all, the purpose for this study, for the Complete Streets study, was to develop some preliminary streetscape design concepts. And by the way, I promise I won't read the slides. The idea here was that with all of the cities coming together and the counties and all the other agencies coming together, we can talk in sort of generic terms about what we all would like to see the street become and what we would like to do along the street. But we don't prescribe specifics. Rather, we talk about general ideas. And so the idea was here to come up, we call them preliminary design concepts, because no one is bound by these. They're just for the guidance of the cities, and we sort of hope the cities will be interested in pursuing and taking advantage of the data and the information that we've developed. And the idea is to take what has been a traditional state highway and convert it into a complete street. This is part of an evolution that is just over 100 years old. Last summer we celebrated the first paved highway in the California State Highway System. It was in front of San Bruno City Hall on El Camino Real. So we went back, and their historic society dressed in old-timey clothes and turned over a shovel of dirt and all that. But in the 100 years that we've been looking at the street, what we have learned is that many talented jurisdictions are doing excellent work. There's a great long-term transit plan from VTA. There's a great long-term transit plan from Samtrans. Caltrans has very good plans. The cities have good general plans. The problem is that prior to our effort, we felt like there wasn't good cross-consultation. We weren't sharing all of our information and in that way trying to bring everyone together to work together. So this project was designed to come up with some general concepts, working closely with the cities, especially the 4 pilot cities, and come up with general ideas for what it meant if you wanted to develop a complete street plan. And a complete street is a street that is designed to meet all the needs of its community. Mobility needs, that would include pedestrians and bicycles, as well as trucks, buses, single occupant vehicles. We would look to enhance the life of the street so that the public would feel more comfortable using it, which would bring about more prosperity for the merchants and the services offered along the street, and then add those community amenities and physical collection points that are the important physical manifestation of a growing sense of community. So that's what we started out trying to do. We didn't start with answers. We did start with a lot of good consultants and also a lot of talented planners from each of the cities to work on it. The book that we've passed out today, you have copies, and we have a few other copies that we'll make available to staff and to the media. Well, staff has copies, but we'll make sure that there's a few more copies available. By the way, this all also presented on our webpage where it can be downloaded for free. So the book has a lot more detail, and I'm not going to go through all of that. But as we talk about different possible elements for complete streets, you can see there are certain things need to be done. The first, maybe most controversial, is the notion of lane narrowing. And the issue there, very hard for Caltrans, but in the end they became very strong participants in this. The concept is that if you have a street that exists and there's development on both sides of it, and you want to try to get more use from the street, it's probably inevitable that you're going to have to wrestle with the question of just how thick, how wide is the right-of-way, and what can you do with it. And with careful design and consideration, possibly changes to speed limits, Caltrans is comfortable under some circumstances taking existing 12 and 14-foot lanes and taking those down to 11-foot lanes. They have used 11-foot lanes elsewhere, although they come with speed restrictions, so all this has to be worked out, and each city is going to have to work on that detail themselves. There's also turning lanes, which traditionally Caltrans has wanted to be 12 feet. They're willing to take those all the way down to 10 feet in light of the fact the vehicles are basically stopped before they make the turn, so that should be safer. Another major component that draws a lot of attention and comment are the intersection improvements. And the concept here is that you want to shorten the area that the pedestrians have to walk in crossing the street. And therefore, what you do at the corners is you bulb out, as it's called. You can see a little bit of it there in that picture on the right. And you'll see more detail on other pictures in here and also in the book. But the concept is that because you can't allow parking at the corner anyway, if you extend the curb out just 4 or 5 feet perhaps, you don't eliminate any parking because the parking can still go into the assigned locations, but you shorten the distance for the pedestrians, thereby making it safer. Then also, if you can, you would like to add a median. The traffic engineers call these refuges, which I think is amusing, but perhaps a realistic term. So the pedestrians have a place to stand out of the traffic if they don't make it all the way across the street. And that, again, you'd want to you get into the refuges or into the median, and you'll see, as we've talked about it, the median are different grades, different purposes. The basic concept, though, is that whatever you do, we recommend that the landscape be designed so that there's clear visibility of the street level. So we have trees that leaf out taller, and landscape material that will stay low enough, and in that way there's still good visibility of the buildings along the street for the passing motorists. Here's some examples of what those bulb outs or what those crossings could be. The picture on the left is showing what happens if you eliminate on-street parking. We're not advocating that, but there are some cities that wanted to know what that would look like. And so you see the concept that there's added landscape there and just a more attractive approach at cost of parking. On the right hand side, you see the picture of the same design, only there on-street parking continues. And the idea there is you may lose some parking because of the bulb outs that I've talked about, but basically parking is still allowed, and you're able to still to gain a lot of the landscape amenities. And then I talked about the enhanced medians. There's not too much more to be said about that. But you can notice perhaps on the right-hand side picture how I talked about the design is to clearly leave visibility for the buildings, because we're expecting to see more and more attractive buildings along the street, and therefore we want to leave those in position. Also, the merchants can be anxious about whether they're going to be blocked off in visibility, and we don't recommend that. It's safer to do that median with that high-low landscaping concept. But as you can see from the picture on the left, the concept is that if you raise those medians, they're safer. You're channeling the traffic more, and that's maybe a little bit less convenient for the motorist, but on the other hand, it's more attractive, it's safer, and you can see how then it protects that left turn lane, thereby allowing a more narrow left turn lane. Now, having talked about the things that can be done to the street, physically done to the street to include all forms of, to enhance all forms of mobility, Then there's a question about the sustainability aspect, because that is something we need to consider in everything we do in this day and age. And so we've had the people working in both counties on storm runoff issues and other sustainability issues, including the public health departments, involved in the design work, and they've added a number of features that are designed to enhance the sustainability of this design as well as the aesthetics. And so you can see in order to prevent water runoff in case of storm, you can put in what are called rain gardens, and that is the idea that more of the water is stayed there. It's valuable for the landscape, and it seeps into the ground through those sorts, and it doesn't run off. Also, you can use pervious concrete pavement. This is something that was not available just a few years ago, but there now is pavement with long life that will let the water seep through it. The reflective pavement coating, that's the idea about trying to keep the street cooler, thereby generating less heat radiating off the street. It's also better, more pleasant for the pedestrians, and it's also better long life for the asphalt, and also it's easier on the vehicles and their tires. And I've noted the canopy trees, and then also we've talked with Caltrans about converting over the street lights to LED lights. All of these things are done not so much to increase the functionality of the street, but rather to increase the sustainability of the street. The goal here being, as I had mentioned, we want this to be a street that we're proud of. Some people get excited and say we want tourists to come here and want to see El Camino Real first thing before the Golden Gate Bridge. We'll see. There may take a while to reach that stage. This is a diagram. It's so small. I don't recommend you try and read it. It is on page 17 of the book that we gave you earlier, and we took one of the four cities, that is San Bruno, and we just did a rendering of how this design looks. And what you can see from that is that the orange boxes are the four key intersections that San Bruno selected for special treatment for the pedestrian walkways and the breaks in the median, etc. And then you can see four orange straight lines. Those are pedestrian crossing points that they wanted to add as well. The green strips in the middle of the street are places where landscape would go. The yellow, I guess it is, on either side for stretches is the pervious area, the rain gutters, the rain gardens. And then the dotted red lines indicate where there will be trees and landscape. That's shown not to talk about the specifics of San Bruno, but to talk about the concept of how we're looking at the whole street and doing it for a lengthy stretch. We're not talking about doing 100% of the 43.4 mile length corridor we're studying, but we are saying that in every jurisdiction there may be key sections, and these are the sorts of things that we'd like to help you work out to see if you'd like to put those in your community. There's always a question about why are we doing this? What's the reason? What's the purpose? And what we're talking about with the complete streets, we find that in many cities, a little less true perhaps in Palo Alto, but in many cities they have great aspirations for building the city beautiful, and yet they have some trouble drawing the private investment. And just as you'll be wrestling on South El Camino Real, and you're doing that very well so far, but there's more yet to be done, if you can encourage the right kind of developers, you'll get a better quality of development. You certainly have seen that along University Avenue. Every city would like to replicate that experience, not the exact buildings, but that sort of experience along El Camino. And in doing that, these kinds of improvements will enhance the value and will encourage, we hope, developers to be more interested in implementing what you have put into your general plan. We'd also like to get a better linkage between transportation and land use planning. And that's really what started this whole thing, the city's approving buildings and then sending a draft EIR to Samtrans or VTA saying, what do you think of this? We wanted much better linkage and much better coordination and planning so that we can move people more effectively. Our goal here is to prove the theory that well-managed development does not come with unacceptable problems. And in fact, there can be offsets that in balance would give encouragement to the people now living in your community to say, okay, it's worth it because this is more attractive, or this is an attractive feature or positive aspect that I think I'd like to have in my neighborhood. And therefore, I'm not so concerned about other aspects of the building. The problem is that we can tell you that from the initiative, but of course you're the ones that will be at the public hearings, and our hope is that people can understand the kind of quality we're trying to develop, and they can feel a little more comfortable about what the future holds. The idea about integrating sustainable streets is just, again, continuing the idea that in everything we do, we need to be more sustainable. We cannot keep building the kind of infrastructure and work that we have now, because it's not economic, it's not good environmentally, and therefore, in anything we do, we want to be looking at the sustainability aspects. We don't only want to, we want not only to build a beautiful street, but we also want it still 10 and 15 years from now for people to look at it, and despite whatever renovations may be needed, to say this is really good, this street is functioning, and I am proud of it. And it should, in the long run, reduce the costs. This is another rendering to give you a bigger idea, or a bigger image of the kinds of things that would go into a complete street with the sustainability aspects. Again, this is rather small. It is on page 37 of the report that you have if you'd like to see more detail. But let me not repeat that, just to say this calls out some of the things that I've just talked about. Now, one of the issues we get into is a debate about growth. Some people are concerned that complete streets and the expense you would go to build them will induce growth. And there is some argument to that. It's not necessarily so, but it is a good and plausible argument. So what we're trying to talk about with people is, in looking at our existing streets, we'd first make the argument that the street is not, it's not something someone should feel comfortable defending. That people should not be looking at this and say, I'm not going to tell you what city this is in, so I can say bad things about this. But basically, we don't imagine anybody reasonably looking at that and saying, I want this preserved. I don't want to see a change. And so you step up, and then that low density also doesn't generate revenue. It makes services more costly for the city in general. That's quite a street to maintain and lights to maintain for very little usage. So that the revenue and expense is not a very positive balance. So we come in and say, well, you should put in these amenities, and that will improve the value of the property. And this is, we did renderings of the same location. There's no change to the land use. There's just the bulb outs for the pedestrians and the various amenities with the trees and the median and the better transit stop. And so we point out these amenities will improve value, but however, they will not reduce service cost. And in fact, they may increase service cost because there's more infrastructure to be dealt with. And so the next step that each city is going to have to face is the reality that greater density will reduce unit costs of service. Now, again, the Grand Boulevard's not saying this is what anyone should do, but we're saying these are the kinds of questions that we'll approach down the road, and then you'll have to address. But as you can see from this street, behold, it is vital, it's lively. Some people would be concerned about the increased density, and we would say that's fine, you should be concerned about that and think about that. But on the other hand, look at the street scene, look at the vitality with the shops and the pedestrian access and use and that sort of thing. I'm not going to say that's better, but I'm going to say it has more in it for the community, and we think therefore it's worth each city's considering. Then one of the problems, and I'm almost to the end here, I feel like I've talked long enough, but let me finish up. One of the concerns we have is last night I was talking with a group, and they were saying you shouldn't allow developers onto your committee. They'll poison the ideas. And our argument is, no, that's not so. Everybody who is going to play a part in building this beautiful street and changing our communities in a positive way should have a say at the beginning, and we should understand the issues right from the get-go. So that one of our issues always has been, how do you balance all these various needs? And we have all these competing priorities that we go through. And so, especially if you take the fixed width of the right-of-way, you have a question. Are you going to run more buses? And here's one you've already dealt with. If it's going to be extremely effective buses, are you going to restrict other forms of traffic for the sake of the bus? There's a competing priority. For the convenience of pedestrians, you want to have nice crossings and that sort of thing, but the more pedestrian crossings there are, the more impact on slowing traffic. And so there are constant balances that have to be struck. And again, that's the point we make is every city is going to have to work their way through that themselves. But in this report, we're hoping that we're giving you the information that you'll need so you can define the issues for your community as you go forward. I also would be remiss if I didn't mention the role of Caltrans in this. Most of us who have had experience in government have long viewed Caltrans as a major part of the problem. And in dealing more with them, we've got more sympathy for them for what they're trying to accomplish. And the problem is that they've been in a silo, as have many of us, working on projects alongside each other and just arguing when our dreams didn't work with the other's plans. In this case, to their credit, Caltrans has come forward. They joined us in it. They joined this effort at the beginning. They've been very flexible, very open, making a lot of contribution. It's still a difficult process. If you want a 10-foot turning lane, you're going to have to go through a 9-month permit process. And I think looking at the situation they're in, it's possible that that will not go away. Because of their statewide concerns and their precedent-setting concerns and liability issues. But on the other hand, they are quite open to it. They are granting design exceptions now that they would not have granted a few years ago. We'd like to think we played some part in that, but they really deserve the great credit for that. The thing we have to mention there as well, because some people wonder, are we pushing development? Are we pushing growth to an extreme? We are keeping safety in mind as well as aesthetics. It's not just that we want a beautiful street with vitality, a street that the community can be proud of, a street that moves the traffic and moves people through various forms of mobility. But we also know this has to be done very carefully. And safety is a primary consideration, and we would not compromise on that. We want to make sure we have that noted ahead of time. And that completes the presentation. I hope that's a good overview, and I'll be delighted to try to answer any questions that you may have. The last thing I will say is that we have a web page, grandboulevard.net. And on that page, I invite you to go look at that if you're interested. There is a section called the library, and in that we have the best collection of planning, all manner of planning documents in the library, accessible and downloadable at no charge. And the reason the library is so good is that all the participants have put their information on there. So you'll find the various use permits, specific plans, precise plans, general plan amendments, traffic studies, all sorts of things from all of the jurisdictions, including Palo Alto. And that makes it a great resource. In addition to that, we also have copies of all these studies that we have finished, the 2006 existing condition report, the 2011 existing condition report, the multimodal transit strategy that VTA and Samtrans worked on, and an unlimited other. Let me stop now and field any questions that you may have.
So thank you, Mr. Garvey, for an excellent report, presentation, and for the information on both the Grand Boulevard Initiative and the Complete Streets. See that we have one speaker card from a member of the public. If anybody else would like to speak, there are speaker cards in the back, and you can be recognized if you turn in the speaker card, and we'll give you 3 minutes to speak. So with that, before we turn to the commission for comments, Vice Chair Keller.
Our public speaker is Robert Moss.
Thank you, Chair Michael and Commissioners. This is kind of interesting. I want to give it a little historic perspective. Trying to upgrade El Camino is not a new idea. We started working on it in the late 1970s. A fellow named Ken Artunian was president of the Barron Park Association at the time, and after Barron Park annexed to Palo Alto, we started looking at how to improve the quality of the businesses and the environment along El Camino. And so Ken went and talked to almost everybody on the street. And we had proposals for improving the streetscape, putting in planters, because he's a landscape architect, just making the place look nicer. only about a third of the people even wanted to talk to him. The rest of them were either absentee landlords or they had no interest in doing anything at all. So trying to get anything done on a overall level is frankly impossible. You do it lot by lot, spot by spot, when a particular parcel is redeveloped. Over the last 40 years, about 20% of the properties on El Camino between Page Mill and Adobe Creek have been redeveloped. The other 80% are the same as they were 50, 60, 70 years ago, basically. So it's not going to be a speedy thing to change what's there now. Just a couple of comments about eliminating on-street parking. If you do that, you'll destroy the economic viability of about a third of the businesses along El Camino in that area, because they either have no off-street parking or the parking lots are behind and you have to go down a side street and hunt to find them. So nobody will be able to park in front of the businesses. I'll give one example. Ernie's Liquors. No parking lot in front. There are about 4 or 5 parking lots on the side street, parking spaces on the side street. That's it. And I could give you other examples. High density development. In the section I'm talking about, in particular between, say, Arastadero and almost the Page Mill, the commercial properties along El Camino back up to single-family homes along most of that area. So if you put in a high-density building, you're putting it in directly.
I'm just trying to see who'd like to start. Perhaps Commissioner Tanaka? Commissioner King, you're taking notes. Do you have some comments or questions?
Thank you for an informative presentation. Very helpful to see the general plan that you're presenting. So I do have a few questions. One, you had mentioned Caltrans was okay with a reduction in lane widths, at least in many cases, but you said with some speed changes. What typically, if in a typical part of El Camino, if the 11-foot lanes were used, what is the maximum speed that Caltrans would allow?
They'll make that answer, they'll answer that question separately for each and every application. That's what takes so long. And in some cases, if there's clear visibility, they'll say higher, 35 miles an hour. In some cases, if the visibility is not so good, the clearance is not so good, they would want to go down farther. But rather than giving you a number and giving you an idea, I think it has to be worked out with each application. And your traffic engineers will be ready to do battle if they don't agree with that.
I see. But it sounds like it's likely 25 to 35 would be the range that one would see.
I wouldn't like to be quoted, but on the other hand, I'd bet on it.
Okay, got it. So your past experience indicates 35. There are cases when they would allow 35 miles per hour.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then, let's see. So we commonly hear refrains from the public about how El Camino, I would never, basically, to quote, I would never walk there. That's such an unattractive place. You're barking up the wrong tree. You're never going to make it attractive. And in fact, we just had a discussion, action item about sidewalk, increasing the sidewalk width, sort of in support of this general principle of making the streetscape more attractive, and that was a theme. Now, the people who came out may have been was, I think, biased against the plan, but still, that's a common refrain. And so, I guess my question would be, if you were to, on either the website or in your reports, if you were to if you could point to a place where you showed, okay, here's the before photo and here's an after photo as an example to point people in a direction of, well, here's what we're talking about could happen, where would that be?
I don't know if we're ready to do that just yet. So we're using renderings, as you noted, that three-part rendering I had in the proposal. But I think the speaker also makes a very good point when he said this is going to be lot by lot. 3 times we've had, over the course of 8 years, we've had an awards ceremony where we selected certain either plans adopted by governmental entities or buildings that have been recently built that exemplify the 10 guiding principles that all the 19 cities have agreed upon. They're highly generic principles, and they're quite consistent with the El Camino Real plan that Palo Alto adopted in the last year or so. The original award ceremonies, I think there were 7 winners, and 6 of them were plans, and 6 were plans, and 1 was a building. Last November, there were 17 awards given, and 16 of those were developments, and only 1 was a plan. So we think this means that we're moving as the economy improves and as our work is going along further, and the cities have worked on plans for the corridor, we're moving to the point where we're going to see more attractive buildings. That's by way of saying that while we don't have a lot to show so far, we do expect to see a lot of construction, probably this summer, of good examples, and then next year we will have some pictures to show people practically and really what can happen. Our experience is that people are much more afraid of the idea than they are when they finally see the completed buildings. And we hope, the idea here is not to convince people as to what they should do. The idea here is to elevate the level of civic discourse, to give people calmness so they know exactly what we're talking about, and they can take well-reasoned positions for or against based on that better understanding.
Okay, thank you. I look forward to seeing those. And are you, does your organization take any position on bus rapid transit and how that might play into your principles?
No, we don't take a specific stand on any one point. The work that VTA is doing is highly consistent with the guiding principles, so we run in parallel with them. But always our mantra is that we can't tell a particular city or a particular transit district what they should do. That has to be worked out by the locals who have the decision-making control. We like BRT as a concept, but we're not in a position to endorse any specific proposal.
Great, thank you. And then last question, you referenced the solar reflective pavement coating. Is that actually something that's in use today?
Experimentally, yes. The engineers are now saying that it works, and they're ready to use it a good deal more. We think it'll be quite common within a few years.
Is that a top coating over the existing pavement?
No, it's built into the asphalt, as I understand it, or into the material.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Alcheck?
Well, first, thank you for your report and for your efforts with the Grand Boulevard Initiative. I'm, in general, a big fan of the initiative itself. I'm curious, is there, I guess one of my questions is, what cities do you think have made the most progress with respect to their preparation for the Grand Initiative or their involvement in furthering the goals of the Grand Initiative? I guess another way to phrase this would be, which of our neighbors is doing an exemplary job in working towards the goals of this initiative?
It's kind of hard to give a grade because a lot of it depends upon conditions. Again, as your speaker pointed out, in sections of Palo Alto, the lots are small and so shallow that it's a great handicap in order to see a development. In some other communities where they have larger parcels, they've been able to do broader scale planning, and investors have been encouraged by the whole idea that the city may be investing something in. And I'm a little reluctant to name cities that have done well because I'm concerned that it'll sound like I'm saying other cities have done poorly, but I will anyway. What San Jose has done on the Alameda for their city beautiful is their street beautiful. No, beautiful street is excellent work. Now, the conditions favored what they were doing, but I give them credit for taking advantage of the opportunities. So that's a very pleasant street to drive along already. It was nice before, and they're enhancing it. It's not finished yet. The plans are done, but so I think they get credit for that. The city of San Mateo has been very interested in taking what's a pretty ordinary circumstance for most cities, and that part of the El Camino. The farther north you go, the smaller the lots get, and the more you have family trust owning lots, and they can't seem to agree on what to do with them and that sort of thing. And San Mateo has quite a bit of that problem. But with the Bay Meadow project going out, first the practice field on 101, and they did a very nice development there. And now they're continuing that theme as the track itself is gone, and Caltrain will be moving a train station, consolidating two into one location, and they're building quite a community center around that. So I give them credit for planning very carefully and trying to take advantage of their physical circumstance. I think you'd also see Sunnyvale doing some excellent work. They're one of the cities that had those large parcels that were no longer, the economy had changed to where they weren't in such productive use. And they're planning early on for nodes and for the cross traffic and concentrating traffic in certain locations. That planning is quite good. They haven't seen a lot of building yet, but I'm sure it's going to come. South San Francisco has done some excellent work. BART put a tunnel right through an area that they wanted to see redeveloped, and where some cities would have been unhappy, South San Francisco just put a park on top of it with a bike lane connecting the BART station with the local high school and a shopping center, and now they're building housing along that walkway. So they've done some pretty interesting work. They also have a community attitude that supports far greater density, so they're putting up 5- and 6-story buildings, and the community is very comfortable with that. So the circumstances change from city to city. But those are some of the cities that what impresses me is they've taken what they have, the resources they've had, and they've applied those extremely well. But I would be remiss if I didn't also talk about the work that you've been doing here in Palo Alto on the El Camino design standards. It hasn't come forward, I understand, but you've done very excellent work. Your staff, your public involvement, and the work of the commission has been very good in that direction. I've been impressed with that. One of the completed projects that gives an image for what is to come is Stanford Avenue at El Camino. And that's sort of a modest example because it doesn't have the accompanying land use that would make that a vital, lively intersection for pedestrians and that sort of thing. But it's a good example of how you made improvements without having too serious adverse effect upon the parking. But the land use around it, it is what it is, and I don't think it's going to be changing on the west side of El Camino. But I think that's an example of where your staff and the commission did a very nice planning job and worked it out. That, interestingly, was the first effort, maybe in the whole state, where Caltrans sat down with a city and negotiated in details what had to be done in order to pre-planning for the design exception. And it's a model now that cities all over the state are using. Old timers will remember Virginia Warheit, who worked for your department. And she's retired and moved out of state, but that's how long ago it was. But she worked for years on that, and she ultimately got that worked out. That was a landmark step. But a lot of this stuff, I know you have appreciation for it because you work so much and you're professionals in this area. But for the general public to talk about this kind of progress seems almost silly because they don't see any buildings yet. But that's sort of the foundation work that we've been working at.
I don't share our speaker's concern about the lot size issue because, and this may be because I'm inherently optimistic, but I sense that some creative parcel accumulation by creative developers will alleviate that issue, and maybe for an individual lot owner right now, they don't see necessarily the potential of their lot, but if that lot gets put together with a few others nearby, it could present really an interesting development opportunity. That being said, do you share my view that this Grand Boulevard represents a significant opportunity for a future transit-oriented development from the perspective of residential density, like that this could potentially be in 20 years a boulevard that provides housing for thousands and thousands of units all over the Bay Area?
I'll say generically, yes. I don't know how many units we're talking about in total. I think what we will see is more intense development at certain key locations. I know some of the conversations that Stanford had early in the medical center discussion was about what to do with the shopping center, and they had a concept of putting a front on it and have the shopping center behind. That went away as the project went forward and had other kinds of issues, and the medical center was really on their A list, so they focused on that, and I certainly understand that. But I think, for example, not to say we would push development, but I think the economic, in the long run, the marketplace will generate a lot more value in the vicinity of the multimodal transit center that's in your plan at the Caltrain station, the VTA terminus. If those plans ever become a physical reality, then I think that area could accommodate a lot more growth, a lot more density, and could do it in such a way that would not have that much of an adverse effect upon the rest of the community, while also offering some amenities so that the existing residents would say, this is worth it. You know that plan better than I do. If there is a theater in there for theater works, or if there are some restaurants, or if there are some public assembly places where people can ride their bike down on a Saturday morning and have coffee, that kind of thing is the physical manifestation necessary to see a sense of community emerge. And I think that sort of thing could happen. I also agree with you that I wouldn't say it's hopeless as to those small parcels, but I think, again, I don't think the speaker said it was impossible. I think he said it would take a long, long time, and I do agree with that. Let's agree that 100 years from now, the development in neighborhoods like that will be very different, but who knows in the meantime. I mean, they own their land and they have their rights, and we respect that, right?
Right. Well, I think in less than a couple of years, we'll see something like, I don't know the exact count, but 1,000 plus units on the corner of San Antonio and El Camino. Mm-hmm. I'd be really surprised if the owners of Stanford Mall weren't looking at that project and wondering how many housing units they could create on their property, whether or not they have the current development rights to do that. But it sure seems like the investment in infrastructure, specifically regarding the transportation all along the Grand Boulevard, would make any residential development there really attractive. So.
Part of our thought on awarding recognition to certain projects that meet what we think the street, everybody seems to agree that the cities agree the street should be moving towards, is that as the public sees those, they'll get a better sense of comfort as to what could happen. And the hope, as I said before, is to elevate that level of discourse, not to tell them they should approve, that they should accept greater density, but rather to elevate the factual basis of the conversation so that it's a more rewarding and less emotional conversation. Most of the street will be lower density for our lifetimes, but we would like to see some really first-rate quality come in. I should have mentioned early on that when I started with this project, I was hired by Mike Scanlon at Samtrans to go see if the cities were willing, and I met with the city staffs all up and down the peninsula, and the first rule that the city managers laid down was they would play, well, actually the first rule was they wouldn't put any money into it, but the second rule was no land use planning. And that, of course, is the core of what a city is. And so I knew that no city would willingly say, sure, you can make plans for my property, for my city. However, as the guiding principles evolved, and they were debated over 3 different meetings, so that was 9 months of debate, the task force chose to add TOD, saying that they do encourage greater densities for TOD at fixed transit locations. And that was a unanimous vote. And when I went back to the city managers, they said, if my council member voted for it, then I don't have a problem with it. And so that was kind of an example of how the cities work together. The only other land use issue that they have touched through all the years is they have called for for mixed use, meaning greater densities along the corridor. They haven't said where, but they've said that's something we think is in the future of the corridor. What we're learning from a lot of consultants, Michael Friedman, who I think has done some work with your city, very interesting speaker. There's a video in our library that is pretty amazing as he talks about the nature of growth in retail. And he's saying that the old model of having all this retail scattered along the street will no longer be successful. What will happen is that as population increases, the retail will become more effective and more concentrated, and there'll be more revenue generated, and there'll be more available for your citizens as well. So that density equals increased revenue by his argument. He's an expert and I'm not, but that certainly is counterintuitive to what we thought in the 70s.
And did you say earlier that all these resources are available on your website, these videos?
Yes, yes. grandboulevard.net, and go to the library and you can find those. I think the videos are in the library. You may have to look around a little bit for that.
Well, thanks again for your time.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Keller. He passed.
Thank you. So let me follow up first with a couple of things that came up from my fellow commissioners. So first of all, with respect to lot consolidation, I do think that in order to build along El Camino where there are shallow lots, and particularly where it backs up against low-density housing, that lot consolidation will facilitate building things that fit contextually on El Camino with the surrounding property. In particular, the meeting where where we're talking about sidewalk widths, people will say, well, this encourages lot consolidation, and my response to that is so. I think that that's effectively, in fact, what the city has said in the housing element, that lot consolidation does happen and is, in some sense, being encouraged by market forces. So I don't see a particular problem with that per se. Obviously, it does mean that people have to sell their land to others in order to do lot consolidation, but that can often produce better development and more flexibility in terms of dealing with sidewalk widths. Since you're much more familiar with the breadth of El Camino or the Grand Boulevard from San Jose to Daly City, are there other cities in which they have problems, challenges along the lines of having shallow frontage property on El Camino or whatever it's called in the various city, with low-density housing behind? Are there other cities we can look at and see maybe how they addressed or solved this problem?
The answer is yes. There are several cities with the problem, and the challenge. And the farther north you go, the more prevalent it is. Plus, in those older cities, as I mentioned, it may have sounded like an aside, but there are a great number of family trusts, property and family trusts. And the family members, after a generation or two, they don't even know each other perhaps, and they can't agree on what they want to do. So that's a major obstacle. And cities don't want to use eminent domain to consolidate the parcels, so a lot of that land just sits. But to your point, there are a few nice projects that went in that did work out arrangements with the neighborhoods. But I can't say there's any city that has solved the problem completely. There are just cities that have put in a couple of projects that worked well. One of the better ones in Daly City, they did a project. Their civic auditorium is called the War Memorial Building, and it sits right on El Camino Real. And behind it is a steep hill going up in a neighborhood that's low density. El Camino on one side, the hill, the neighborhood on the other. A developer came in and put up a rather large condominium complex. He also had challenges with parking, so he cut a deal with the city where he built a large underground parking structure for both to use, put a patio between the memorial building and the project, and then a very nice staircase up the hill to the neighborhood behind. And bus stops and such right there as part of the project. And less than a block away is one of the major bus terminals in the north, the major one in the north part of the county, called Top of the Hill. So that meant that people in that neighborhood for the first time could come down the staircase and walk across the plaza to El Camino and walk 1 block to catch a bus going in any different direction. And that was an amenity they were very interested in, and the hill is landscaped and that sort of thing. So there are a few examples like that where enlightened developers, instead of arguing with the neighbors, have tried to talk with the neighbors. And the neighbors, rather than just arguing, have tried to call out what they specifically need. We hope to see more of that, but we haven't seen a lot of it up to this point.
If you could provide examples like that to staff that they can provide to the commission, that would be additional examples. The interesting thing about the example that you provided is presumably, being that there's a hill, the small residences look down on the condo complex, as opposed to in a flat like area like Palo Alto is in this area, a tall condo complex would look down into the backyards of the single-family residences, and that would be a completely different topography.
If I could just add, they're not looking down on the condos any longer. It's a pretty big condo complex.
They're looking up at it?
Yes.
Okay.
But your point is still well taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you know how much truck traffic there is on El Camino Real, and whether the truck traffic is an issue for the narrowing of lanes, and whether that's a major part of the concern of Caltrans for the narrowing of lanes and safety?
The initial approach of Caltrans for any request for a narrowing of lanes 2 years ago was to picture the largest possible vehicle that would use the lane at all. And so basically they were using a bus or else a major semi-trailer as the measure of what kind of turning movements had to be allowed and that sort of thing. Now they're showing more flexibility. They're now letting the cities talk with them about how can you accommodate? You must accommodate the buses, you must accommodate the truck traffic, but how can you do it? And there are some cases where cities have the physical conditions where they can run the truck on a side street or through an alley or a different way so it doesn't have to use the main street. And Caltrans has been flexible in a case like that, saying, all right, in that case, if you can enforce that and you can educate so that everybody understands how it works, then we will look at reducing the lanes width.
Thank you. With respect to El Camino and California and Stanford Avenue, that was a major pedestrian corridor, particularly with students in east of El Camino crossing that El Camino to go to by bike and by pedestrian to go to the nearby elementary school, and also people traveling to go to the middle school on the other side. So in some sense, that is a situation where pedestrian traffic was enhanced, pedestrian bicycle traffic was enhanced, without the need for doing increased density development. And in particular, I agree with you, you're not going to see increased density development on any of those corners, I don't think, in that community. And so I think that El Camino can be enhanced and made more attractive for that. Without necessarily increasing the intensity, and in terms of dividing up the cost among more units, a study was done several years ago. I believe it was by Byrne Beecham, Councilmember Byrne Beecham, where he talked about essentially we lose money on every housing unit in terms of the revenue being brought in per housing unit and the expenses that the city incurs in providing services for those housing units. So it's sort of like one of those things where you lose money on every one, but you in fact don't make it up in volume, unlike the standard slogan. The solar reflective coating, I assume that is to reduce the heat island effect. Is that the idea?
That's correct.
Okay. And could you talk a little bit about median trees and shrubs and things like that? I mean, I would love to see more median trees along El Camino. I'd love to see it also along the San Francisco Creek. How do we deal with that? For example, the interface between Palo Alto and Menlo Park, where it's sort of that whole dirt area is not very attractive at all.
Well, I'm glad to address the complexities and difficulties on El Camino Real. You're on your own as far as San Francisco Creek goes. I know enough about it to say I don't know. Part of the issue is that in the state of California, we have only one standard for highways. Therefore, the rules for El Camino Real are the same as for Interstate 5. For example, you may not put tables and chairs out on the sidewalk in front of your restaurant in El Camino Real, because legally that's defined as the shoulder of a highway, and there's a hard prohibition. No permit may be granted for an obstruction on the shoulder of the state highway. If you see tables and chairs, it means nobody wants to ask. So there are certain rules that seem not to make sense until you get deeper into them. One of that set of rules that's complicating is trees in the median, because the existing rule is that you have to have 12 feet on each side of the tree, and you have to put up a crash barrier that can accommodate the pressure, probably from a speeding small truck. Well, that makes no sense in an urban setting. And the first pass through, and Menlo Park was on the lead on this one, they wanted to put trees in the median. And Caltrans' great contribution or yielding point before the Enlightenment was, we'll let it happen, but you have to put in 18-foot tall concrete curbs. And that didn't do it either. They actually formed a task force, and they invited us to comment, and now they're working on a proposal where you need only, I think it's 4.5 feet on each side of a tree. They will not be trees that are going to grow to a great thickness, but you can get trees in the median. And then the barriers they're looking at are sort of breakaway, that are not nearly as obtrusive, and they may in fact be hidden by landscaping. So it's an example of a very slow, careful process that we're trying to win some amendments. But the one thing we all agree on is that the visibility is important. We think it's important for the merchants and also these beautiful buildings that will adorn El Camino Real. And Caltrans correctly points out that they're very concerned about having several hundred feet of visibility clearance for turning lanes. So the whole thing with trees in the median is in flux. The older medians, you may remember, they all tend to have lower bushes and not trees. But we're working at that. We want the trees too. We want the canopy. We want that pleasant summer shade and the aesthetic effect it brings. But it's complicated.
Yes, with respect, I was referring to on San Francisco Creek, actually El Camino over San Francisco Creek. And obviously you can't put a tree there. It'll probably grow in through the bridge. But it'd be nice to have some shrubbery over there rather than the current uses.
Well, we would encourage Menlo Park and Palo Alto working together on that.
Good. Well, I guess staff is hearing me. Could you talk a little bit about the street trees on the curb side of on the sidewalk, and what your thoughts are about the interplay of the street trees, the traffic underneath, the buildings behind, the pedestrian and use. Are there any guidelines or suggestions about that the Grand Boulevard Initiative has?
Not at this point. Caltrans has some standards for trees in the median, which are under review, but we don't have standards for the trees along the sidewalks. Not yet. We'll get into it if the cities want us to get into it. It's more likely that the cities leading the effort will design their standards and share those with the others.
Thank you. I'll just mention 3 other things. One is the Stanford Shopping Center does seem to be migrating towards El Camino Real. I'm not sure exactly the process of that going through. It never came through the commission, so I haven't seen the details of that. I've talked to a number of people in Palo Alto who are not nearly as impressed as others with the development at the corner of El Camino and San Antonio Road. I guess some people like it, some people don't. I, for one, would not welcome an expansive development like that in Palo Alto. And I think if you look at the Mountain View portion north of there, there's some developments that are sort of tall and encroaching on the street. And I have heard, and I agree with that they don't appear to be attractive. They might appear so more in the future, but right now they seem to be imposing. And I'm not sure if that's the vision for the rest of Palo Alto. The final thing is about transit-oriented development. And I know that you're talking about fixed transit, and certainly transit-oriented development makes a lot of sense. Does make some sense along the two major train stations in Palo Alto, the downtown train station and the California Avenue train station. Now I note that this may change with electrifications, but the California Avenue train station has relatively few trains stopping there. Most trains stop at the downtown University Avenue train station, the baby bullets, but a lot of them don't stop at California Avenue. Electrification may change that. I'm not sure how electrification will affect the nature of baby bullets. That's an interesting question. But in particular, the issue is that along El Camino, there is the 522 bus, which I guess stops downtown at University train station, stops at California Avenue, and stops at Charleston Astero. And those are essentially, might be considered transit nodes. But I'm not sure how many people are actually riding that who live in Palo Alto and taking that elsewhere. I may be interesting to get ridership statistics from that. There's the 22 bus, and I'm not sure how many people are actually riding that, boarding it in Palo Alto. So I think that's an interesting question. One of the things is that there, at least from the latest data that I've seen, there is more, among Palo Alto residents, more people bike to work or walk to work than take all forms of transit combined if living in Palo Alto. And so essentially promoting bicycles, as we're going to do, we're reading the bicycle pedestrian plan in the future, that's critically important to our transit effectiveness. Looking at transit use for people who work elsewhere, particularly people who, work in Palo Alto and live elsewhere, particularly people who live far away. Transit use is very important, where we have to be focused on the last mile. But I think that relatively few people who live in Palo Alto are taking transit, and I think that will continue to be the case if there's increased density in Palo Alto, even near transit-oriented development. I think that the studies of people, relatively few people use it from, for example, the Palo Alto Central. I think data was collected on that, and relatively few people there take transit. And they live right next to the Caltrain station. So I think that I'm a little skeptical about the degree to which we really are transit-oriented development, and whether our transit-oriented development is better associated with our businesses and making it easier for people to commute here, rather than our residences, 3/4 of which are mostly single-occupant vehicles to get to work.
Commissioner Tanaka?
So, first of all, thank you also for putting this together. It's quite a good presentation, and I think the Grand Boulevard initiative is a very noble cause, and hopefully it will happen soon. I don't know if you followed our one of our previous meetings where we had a lot of discussion about changing some of the minimum requirements in terms of widening the sidewalks. I'm not sure if you read about it in the paper or heard much about it.
I did not follow that.
Okay.
Sorry.
So basically, the idea was to actually widen the sidewalk to about 12 feet, although the Grand Boulevard wanted 18 feet, and then to have basically some increased setbacks. In any case, that night we got quite a bit of pushback from a lot of the current property owners, saying that it would actually hurt, it would decrease people's willingness to do development. And so I just want to kind of ask you this kind of larger question, where I think the Grand Boulevard Initiative is trying to encourage more pedestrian-oriented ways of transportation or walking. And at the same time, you showed that picture earlier about, I think that was a picture of Sunnyvale or maybe somewhere in Santa Clara, where it's kind of showing a car wash and kind of a barren street and not terribly appealing. Yeah, that one. And so how do you balance the two in terms of some of the things that the initiative is trying to do, yet at the same time we know that in some parts of El Camino, the family trust owns the property, it's hard to get decisions. So how do we encourage the vision that this initiative is trying to promote? Yet at the same time, when we had a very relevant item come up to discuss, there's a tremendous amount of pushback from the developers saying, look, if we do this, I can't develop, it doesn't make sense. You heard about shallow lots. So I guess I'm not looking for a specific answer, but what is your guidance in terms of how do you balance the two and try to make it possible?
I think the answer is that each project has to be looked at in its own context to see what you can receive that the community would like to have, what the developer has to have in order to make it work. Development traditionally has been applicants asking for too much, figuring they'll get turned down, having a brutal fight through the process, and then getting something lesser approved. And there's a whole generation of developers and city people who have lived that way. And I think that's wasteful and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Part of the problem is the cities don't always know what we want from a developer. And if we worked on that and we could meet with the developer and say, these are the kinds of things we're interested in, and then back into the density issues and that sort of thing, I think there'd be a much better chance for the whole community to be involved in a more constructive way. What we do too often is to take one question and debate it, and we don't have a full evaluation of the benefits and the costs involved. And typically, because we're changing something, the costs are fairly evident, and the benefits are not. I don't know what else to say. It's just each one, it seems to me, has to be worked out on a step-by-step basis.
Yeah, I think there's no easy answers, but I just was curious to see if you had any thoughts about it. Thank you.
So one of the advantages of going last is all of the good questions, or many of them, have been posed by my colleagues. But let me come back to the vision and the guiding principles that are put forth in the Grand Boulevard Initiative. And one of the things that you acknowledged is that the challenge of working with the cities that are along El Camino, between San Jose and South San Francisco, each have some autonomy involved in their own planning decisions, and that you encourage the cities to express their own, vision and principles in their general plans. The next topic tonight is a study session about the current state of Palo Alto's progress towards updating the general plan, which we call the comprehensive plan. And I know in particular Vice Chair Keller has put his heart and soul into working on the transportation element. And I was just going through the state of the current draft of the proposed update of the transportation element, and I was looking to see if there were any sort of magic words about Grand Boulevard Initiative or complete streets. And I wondered if you had any suggestions for cities like Palo Alto as we go through this comp plan amendment process as to how we might best leverage or take advantage of the work that you're doing with this initiative.
I guess I would prefer to refer you to your staff. You do have a staff member, Scott McKay? Scott McKay of your planning department attends all of our working committee meetings, and he's the conduit for information. And I would suggest that a better approach would be to get that information through your planning staff. We don't directly get involved in the city decisions, and that's part of our goal, that we do not want to tell cities what to do. The purpose of this whole report, as an example, and the other ones we've done, is to lay out information for everyone to see, the public, the cities, the supporters, the critics, everyone to see if we can't generate some agreement on the essential facts and information. But we don't feel comfortable saying to people, therefore you should do the following, or we're quite reluctant. Even giving awards for outstanding projects was quite a debate on the part of the task force, because it implied that we would not give awards to other projects, which is true. They didn't want, they wanted to be very cautious about grading the cities on how well or how poorly they felt the cities were doing. So I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that, but you do have an expert in-house who can give the answer.
So I guess we'll have to see more of Mr. McKay at our meetings if he's the expert. In your excellent presentation, you talked a lot about the information that's available on your website. And I was wondering if one were curious, would there be data that one could find that would include projections on the current and future use or reliance of north-south transportation? I mean, I'm thinking of to get from San Jose to San Francisco or vice versa. You've got a few freeways, one highway, you've got 280, El Camino, maybe Alma, Central Expressway doing a portion of the peninsula. Middlefield Road is a north-south arterial, 101. But a lot of the interesting aspects of transforming El Camino into a complete street might have the effect of displacing some of the current traffic onto some of those other north-south opportunities. And what's the data and projections about how that might take place into the future?
We do not have a lot of data about that. We haven't done a lot of our own traffic studies, but we work closely with Caltrans, and they have volumes of information. But you make a good point. They're focused on the main arterials, mostly the state highways and also the key east-west support roads. It's something we're starting to talk about more. We just put in a grant application. I mentioned we're not wanting to do much more planning. We're wanting to get money for implementation to help the cities build these projects that are in your plans. But in this case, we did put in money for a regional traffic study. And the thing that prompted it was that the members of the working committee, that's the staff people that meet every month, that they had, several of them reported that they were hearing a lot of complaints in their communities about increased traffic accompanied with a demand that there not be so much growth. And what puzzled them is that there hadn't been any growth, any population or building permits, that kind of thing hadn't happened. What was going on, we think, is the economy recovery and more jobs being added in the Silicon Valley. So we're going for a grant to attempt to define the traffic, the rising traffic, and we think we'd like to try and calculate what part of that is due to regional factors, and then maybe a list of suitable mitigations to try and deal with the regional problems. And those would wind up in the hands of Samtrans and VTA and Caltrains and Caltrain and those folks, because there's not much cities can do. But the other kind of traffic we would define would be the kind of increase we can anticipate from the build out of the general plans. And there we'd like to come up with a lot of good mitigation measures, again, to give guidance to the city. It's kind of a toolbox of what you can use to try and deal with the traffic problems. The reason I'm thinking about that in response to your question, Mr. Chairman, is that for the first time we're in a position where we're going to have to do some studying of the traffic feeding onto and coming off of the corridor. That up to this point we pretty much stuck with a 1/2 mile wide study area with the street down the middle. So it's a 1/4 mile in each direction. And for this study, we know we've got to go bigger. We've got to look farther. So we'll have more information then, but that'll be the first information of its type that we will be developing.
In the last year or so, we've had a number of topics on our agenda which relate to proposals or study session topics that bear upon El Camino. And one of the concerns uppermost in Palo Alto seems to be traffic and parking, both of which are critical aspects of the Grand Boulevard Initiative. And I noticed that the intersection at El Camino and Page Mill in Palo Alto is currently the most congested intersection in the city. It has the lowest level of service. I believe it's level F. And as we've undertaken, for example, the California Avenue area concept plan, the draft transportation element of the comprehensive plan, we've tried to grapple with what the rational approach is when you have an existing problem which is causing a lot of aggravation. Do you, well, I guess my question is, Palo Alto can't be unique in that we have this really important intersection, and it seems to be highly congested. There are other really important intersections up and down the peninsula that probably have the same issues. Is there anything that we can learn from how other cities are attempting to deal with this, consistent with your vision and the guiding principles of the Grand Boulevard?
The short answer, I'm afraid, is no, because everyone has seen their level of service measures rising with the Great Recession. Now that the economy is heating up again, everyone's seeing the same problem that you've been talking about. The traditional improvement that would have been implemented 5 years ago would be to add turning lanes and widen the street and cut back the median and that sort of thing. We no longer think in those terms, but that's one of the issues we'll have to address in the traffic study we're just starting out on. I can't name another intersection. I can't think of another intersection right now that has the challenges of Page Mill because it's pretty far away from any other major parallel arterial. Not terribly far away, but in most cities, including increasingly as you go north, there are more cross streets, and therefore the traffic finds its own level if there's a heavy congestion.
My last question relates to a point that you raised in your presentation, which was the possibility of something particularly enlightened happening at the University Avenue and El Camino intersection, where there had been a major project under consideration by the city, which seems to be on the back burner at the moment. But one of the things that I had worried about in relationship to the possibilities of development at 27 University was that the traffic flowing into and out of Menlo Park and along El Camino, maybe from Mountain View and out of Stanford, and as well as in intra Palo Alto traffic coming up University Avenue, seems to be relatively high volumes currently. And if you impose a really significant, perhaps exciting, perhaps beautiful development in that spot, there's a question of is this going to produce? Is this going to bring everything to a screeching halt because of the additional loading on the infrastructure of the streets and so forth, or is there going to be some, transformational, efficiency that will come from transit or self-driving cars or undergrounding the Caltrain, or is it something that is going to be really helpful to cities like Palo Alto that are trying to make the best possible land uses of places like this?
Yes. It's hard to know what the future brings. One of the issues we always face, you'll see in the slides that I talked about, beautifying the street increases the value and it will draw a more desirable investment. That's not an attempt to say that you should become more dense along the corridor, but it is a statement to say that if you're interested in this, there is revenue that will flow from this. Logic says there will be revenue that flows from this to help pay for it. And that's the issue we face with every improvement. If you could rebuild the multimodal transit center along the plans that Palo Alto has, then that I'm sure would be a terrific positive. If I remember too, there were some segregated ways of getting the bus traffic in and out and that sort of thing to do less interference with the cars. The problem is paying for it, and the logical way to pay for it is to have developers contribute to making the improvement. So you wind up not necessarily making a deal for development, but it's one of the ways that you can pay for things, and that's just one of the many questions that people have to face. In the case of some cities, Daly City had no hesitation. They didn't spend nearly as much at Top of the Hill bus terminal, but they had no hesitation trying to partner with developers who were looking for greater densities. Their only position was that they wanted that development to draw employees that would ride the bus, logically enough. Other folks who don't want to see the growth have to struggle then with how to fund the improvement out of their own revenue or grants. Again, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm giving you all these questions and observations, and I feel like my middle name is "It Depends" as I'm sitting here and trying to go through this. But I'm afraid that it is the only answer. When the time comes to build the multimodal transit center, and I hope that day comes for Palo Alto and for the region, then you're going to have to face how to do it. And there may be more help. Maybe high-speed rail will be here. Maybe electrification will bring something special. There's just too many wild card issues.
Well, I hope you'll come back again soon and give us an update on your work. This is very exciting, and I hope everybody's had a chance to ask their questions, and hope to see you soon.
Well, perhaps I'll see you at some ribbon cuttings this summer. Your city won 3 awards for buildings and 1 award for plans at our in November. You got 4 of the 17, so there's some very interesting things coming here. I thank you for the chance to meet with you.
You're welcome. We'll take a 5-minute break and then reconvene. Let's resume the meeting, and our next topic is a study session on the comprehensive plan status update, and I'd like to recognize Stephen Turner.
Great. Thank you, Chair Michael. Stephen Turner, Long Range Planning Manager. Pleased to give the Commission an update about the efforts to amend the comprehensive plan, as well as Council's efforts to help coordinate and organize a lot of information and studies and community engagement around the Palo Alto process. And so I'll talk a little bit about both. But before I begin, I don't know if Amy mentioned, but Director Gittleman sends her regrets for not being with you tonight. She is attending the housing affordability meeting in South Palo Alto this evening. We had a scheduling conflict, so she is attending that meeting, and I'm writing point here at the PTC meeting. And then second of all, just to kind of connect the previous discussion about the Grand Boulevard, our amended comprehensive plan draft policy document that is being reviewed by the City Council on Monday evening within the transportation element under regional transit networks does have a policy that includes the Grand Boulevard Initiative. It is nothing too special, but the policy reads, support the regional Grand Boulevard Initiative for El Camino Real, including bus rapid transit improvements, without dedicated bus lanes, to support Valley Transportation Authority services. So while the Commission was reviewing the transportation element, I think the subcommittee and the rest of the Planning Commission was well aware about the long-term effort of the Grand Boulevard Initiative and recognizing that as a valuable effort that should be considered as part of our long-range planning. So that kind of gets us into where we have been in terms of the comprehensive plan update. Most recently, staff and the Commission have reviewed three portions of the comprehensive plan amendment. In late January, you recommended adoption of the business and economics element. In mid-February, you recommended moving forward the California Avenue concept plan. And then most recently, the Commission took action on the governance element and deferring that to later on in the process. And that action really represented the conclusion of about a 4-year process that the PTC and staff had to review each element of the comprehensive plan, as well as the two concept area plans, including East Meadow Circle and California Avenue. The Commission is well aware that during that time, the Commission formed PCC subcommittees to review each element. You had discussions with staff and stakeholder groups about the various topics. You held public hearings for each element to review the changes and revisions. And you also made recommendation to include those elements and concept plans into the comprehensive plan update process. And as I mentioned before, the City Council will be reviewing that draft policy document at their meeting on Monday night. So while the PTC was wrapping up your work earlier this year, the City Council began discussions about a revised approach to the comprehensive plan update process. The Council saw that there was a need for a revised process, really as a result of some changing conditions and events that have been happening in the community. I think one of those was the Measure D result, and related issues of housing and density and the impacts of that to established residential neighborhoods. We were also dealing with planned community zoning, really as a concept about, is planned community zoning still working for us? Also in specific relation to the Maybell-Climo project and the J. Paul proposed development on the AOL site, both of those which are no longer moving forward. There was also just general development pressures from the result of an improving economy. Staff was also initiating the downtown development cap survey. We had reached a point at which the comprehensive plan tells us that we needed to conduct a study to determine how much additional cap we should add within the downtown area. Our chief planning and transportation official, Jaime Rodriguez, brought forward many residential permit parking programs and studies, as well as parking issues in the downtown area and general transportation issues throughout Palo Alto to be considered. We're updating our housing element. And so we have a lot of studies that are going on concurrently, and council felt that we needed to have something to kind of bring all of those studies together, really a framework by which we can review the comprehensive plan, we can review these concurrent studies analysis, and we can also have a conversation with the community about how and where we should go as a city in development. And really out of those questions and consideration, the Our Palo Alto program was developed and adopted by council in March of this year. There's really three main components of the Our Palo Alto process. There's ideas, actions, and design, and that's described as attachment A in your staff report. The ideas portion is really a series of meetings, events, and conversations about issues and ideas that are important to the future of the city. They're not really focused on any one particular city effort or any one issue, but it's an opportunity, as we see it, to reach out to the community, to learn about the issues that are important to them. It's really very a broad conversation about topics that concern Palo Alto residents and people who have a stake in this community. The second area is the action portion, and those are the initiatives and concurrent studies that I mentioned earlier that will ultimately lead to recommendations to the City Council and final action. Those include the planned community zoning, the parking and transportation demand management actions, actions to implement the bike and pedestrian master plan, housing-related actions, including the update to our housing element. The third and final portion of the Our Palo Alto initiative is the comprehensive plan, and that's the design portion of Our Palo Alto. That is the Our Palo Alto portion of the comprehensive plan update really envisions an expanded community engagement effort with meetings, an online forum, email communications, and formal hearings. It would also include an extended scoping period for the EIR and an exploration of alternatives that could be discussed within that environmental review document. It's also intended to kind of consolidate all of those concurrent planning efforts and make sure that they get folded into the comprehensive plan process as we move forward. An important part of this process is also the dissemination of baseline reports, essentially existing conditions, where is Palo Alto at right now on a variety of issues. There is also preparation of a draft environmental impact report and a final environmental impact report and a user's guide to go along with the comprehensive plan that will include interactive maps and a process for future amendments. And we want to do all of this and complete all of this work by the end of 2015. So we presented this concept to Council along with a schedule, and Council has bought into the idea of Our Palo Alto and completing the comp plan process by the end of 2015. But a big part of that effort is going to be the community engagement a portion of it. It's really going to be crucial to the success of the efforts. And so tonight we wanted to give you a little bit of a preview of what Council is going to be reviewing on May 5th. I'm referring to a graphic that is in your staff report on page 6, and it really is intended to summarize the types of community engagements that we would like to engage in over these next really 18 months going forward. It's community meetings, it's online engagement, it's community outreach, and public hearings. Through community meetings, we want to have those Our Palo Alto conversations, those larger opportunities to listen to the public and to our community about what is important to them. We also want to hold scoping meetings that are related to the draft environmental impact report. And so we want to be able to have those discussions on specific issues to try to nail down and get clarity on those important issues to the community. Concurrent with that, we'll be doing online engagement. We'd like to have virtual meetings, online surveys, and online discussions through the Our Palo Alto tool on the city's website to get people who don't normally come to meetings, either formal meetings such as the commission or council meetings or any of our scoping meetings, to participate in this process online if they so choose. And so that's a very important part of what we have. The community outreach is also something that is relatively new to the process. As I mentioned before, most of the time we ask the public to come to us to provide their comments. Through community outreach, we want to go out into the community. We want to look at and speak to interest groups and some target audiences to really listen to them, to find out what their concerns are, what are their issues, and fold that back into the larger community engagement exercise. We also want to form a leadership group, a group of local leaders who can help guide city staff about community engagement to make sure that we are doing the right types of engagements and that our engagements are as successful as they can be. And then we want to reach out in other non-traditional ways, like having street stalls at community events. For example, the May Fet Parade happening this weekend, the Palo Alto team will be hosting a booth there. So if you go to the parade, you'll be able to see staff from the city be able to talk with you about kind of the Palo Alto concept. And then we're also looking for other non-traditional events like coffee hour with the planner to have informal discussions kind of at and within the community about issues that people care about. And then finally, we will have public hearings with the Planning and Transportation Commission and City Council, of course, as we're required to do. So, as I mentioned before, all of this is happening really within a 2-year period, and I think we're down to maybe 20 months now. There is a simplified timeline on page 7 of your staff report, and it goes into essentially the 5 different components that we're going to be going through over the next 20 months or so. It's lead-in, visioning, preparation of the draft and final, or the draft comp plan amendment and EIR, preparation of the final comp plan amendment EIR, and then the user's guide. And the staff report goes into detail about what's happening in each of those efforts. The comprehensive plan, of course, has been under development for some time, but the Palo Alto program is really starting to gain some momentum. I've been telling my staff that it just feels like there's not a way at this point to really stop it. It has its own momentum and force, and even trying to direct it in some other alternative way is going to be quite difficult. But it's also very, very exciting. On page 8, we summarize some of the Palo Alto and comp plan amendment events that are going to be happening over the next few months and then looking out later into 2015. But those events have really already started. We started off with a Who Are We discussion last week about demographics and economic trends that are affecting the community. We're also having discussions, as I mentioned, this evening, and one event happening earlier this week on Monday about housing affordability, the informational session about housing issues within the community and how we can address those through the comprehensive plan. We're going to be doing, as I mentioned, online outreach and other engagement activities. We have bike-alongs that are happening in April or later on in May this month. As I mentioned, we'll be going to the City Council on Monday to talk about the policies and programs. We have a formal kind of kickoff to the Palo Alto event on next Thursday, on May 8th. It's really kind of a social event to honor the work of the 1998 comp plan team, but also look forward to the comprehensive plan that we're developing. We also will be holding a series of scoping sessions related to the EIR on various topics in late May and in early June, with an opportunity to come back to the Planning and Transportation Commission to talk about our results from the scoping sessions in approximately mid-year. Some of these dates are in flux and changing, but we hope to have them set very, very soon and get a revised schedule out to you a little bit later on in the coming month. If you turn to page 10, one of the next major milestones is publishing of a draft EIR at the end of December. or at least in December 2014, and also a comprehensive plan amendment policy document at about 80%. So this is a 80% version of what we think the final comprehensive plan will look like. And that will begin another round of extensive public engagement and community dialogue. Whereas, we may only be required to do 60 days of a scoping period or 60 days of a public comment period, we're looking to really extend that to about 3 to 4 months. We think this is another good opportunity to engage with the community about the alternative scenarios that have been developed to make sure that we are on the right track and find out if any adjustments are really need to be made. And so that community outreach and additional online engagement will happen really up through April, but continue really up until August, where we start to have the formal public hearings about the draft EIR and the comprehensive plan amendment, with the goal of having Council adopt a final comp plan amendment and certify the EIR in the October-November timeframe of 2015. So that concludes the staff report. We would be happy to answer any questions or take comments that you may have. Thank you.
So to my colleagues, would anybody like to begin, or are there any comments or questions for Mr. Turner? Excellent report. You seem to have answered all of our questions in advance. I'm sensing from the timeline that our next responsibility as the PTC will be in connection with the draft EIR. Is that correct? And that'll start as early as the scoping meeting in about a month's time?
Yes, we believe so. The scoping meetings traditionally for most EIRs happen at a formal public meeting such as the Planning and Transportation Commission, and we expect to bring forward to the Commission the results of the scoping efforts that we will be doing. But the approach that we're taking is that these scoping sessions will be community workshops out in the community, not necessarily at a PTC meeting, and focused on specific topics that we can drill down into in a more of a formal setting. So these will be really workshops to solicit that public input that will help define the EIR process and content.
Okay. Well, I would like to acknowledge all the hard work by staff, led by Stephen and Chitra and your able colleagues, and by the commissioners who served on the subcommittees for the last 5 or 6 years. One hopes that this hard work will get serious consideration by both the public through the Palo Alto process and the council, and that as it comes time to actually update the comp plan, that you've got a good foundation for a thoughtful and useful update. The horizon year for the comp plan has been extended out by the council to 2030. So I would just encourage staff and the public and the council to be thinking about how challenging it may be in the document that is to be adopted, that it actually be courageous in terms of looking out into the future, which will be different from the present, and certainly different from the past. And that if that courage is reflected in the work that will be done over the next 20 months, perhaps this will be a document that will be useful between now and 2030. Notwithstanding the difficulty of anticipating the future, it's essential that if we're going to have this kind of a horizon year, that effort be conducted. So with that, I wish the council good luck. I hope that the public gets enthusiastic about participating in our Palo Alto. That what we see here tonight is not reflective of their actual enthusiasm. And thanks again for your excellent report. Vice Chair Keller?
Thank you. I do have some questions for you. A typical EIR process doesn't consider schools. doesn't consider financials of the city, and doesn't, to the extent that I understand, consider community services and the equity of the community services among the various neighborhoods. And I'm wondering whether we will either have an expanded evaluation process or expanded EIR process that can consider these three things.
Well, certainly our Palo Alto process over these next 20 months or so is a great opportunity to talk about those issues. The EIR specifically may not include those items that you mentioned. However, that doesn't prevent the city from adopting policies and programs that might address those specific issues. To the extent that those policies and programs have environmental effects, I think to the extent that we can, the EIR would address those. But other than that type of analysis, certainly the public and the council can adopt policies and programs that address those or any other types of issues.
So what I would encourage is that the scoping process not be simply a scoping process for the EIR, but really a scoping process for the Our Palo Alto process. And in terms of the evaluation should not be limited to the EIR, which is a formal evaluation, but should really evaluate along the typical EIR processes and these as well. So I think that would be, from my point of view, a good additions to the mix of our Palo Alto evaluation process. And that feeds into my next issue, which is in terms of alternatives. And my understanding is that there will be several major alternative growth strategies, if you will, that might be considered. Is that right?
Well, we haven't settled on those strategies at all. I mean, really, the direction from council when we started this process many years ago was to look only at 2 geographic areas within the city for opportunities of growth in the California Avenue and East Meadow Circle areas. And so the concept area plans that were developed were intended to look at where that growth could happen and perhaps how much that growth could be. But nowhere else in the city does the existing comprehensive plan promote or encourage additional growth. Even in the downtown area, we still list the development cap and the citywide cap based upon the 1989 land use study hasn't changed as part of our policies and programs. However, through the Our Palo Alto process, I think Commissioner Keller brings up a good point that the scoping process is not really intended to focus people down on thinking about the EIR, but we want to keep it as broad as possible so that we get a variety of comments, not just on the EIR, but about the Palo Alto process and the issues that we're discussing with the community as a whole.
So I do think that that in some sense, only partly intended, we have scope creep. And originally, the revision of the Palo Alto comprehensive plan was, the end date was till 2020, and then it was moved out to 2025 and moved out to 2030. And with a period of time of the future of the comprehensive plan now being 15 years, I think we should not be limited to those things which were envisioned as being in scope for revision of the comp plan several years ago. The changes that have been occurring in the city indicate that we should be broader in our outlook, and the further end date of the comp plan also indicate that we should be broader in our outlook as well. I'm wondering whether we should call this, in this regard, whether we should call it a comprehensive plan update, or whether what we're really migrating towards is a comprehensive plan rewrite. And obviously it's based in large part on the foundational work of the 1998 comp plan, but when you're extending it out another 15 or so years, really a rewrite makes sense. I note that that gives a CPR as an acronym, but I don't think I think it's better than CPU. But perhaps it indicates that in some sense the long-range planning is in some sense on CPR because we've been sort of going beyond our 2010 end date with sort of more of the seat of our pants, because a lot of the planning that was done for the comp plan of 2010, we're well beyond that. Couple of things. Further, one is I'm wondering whether there's an opportunity, along with the city council election, to have any advisory votes. If we, in some sense, have some broad outlines of growth strategies, maybe we should put out to the citizenry on the 2014 election advisory votes on which of those growth strategies they might like in terms of a high growth, medium growth, or low growth. I don't think we're going to have no growth, but if we can quantify them and have people have three kinds of strategies and have people vote on them, that might be more specific than the somewhat ambiguous results of a city council election that may or may not turn on that. The next thing is in terms of, I think that this process is well geared towards creating broad brush policy things. I think that the EIR process, our Palo Alto process, necessarily is good at high level, broad approaches to things. But I think that it will be much more difficult to translate that into editing goals, policies, and programs. And I'm wondering whether it makes sense as part of the completing the comp plan amendment in October 2015, somehow in the middle of 2015, if it makes sense to have another go-round on each of the comp plan elements in a public forum through the Planning Commission to vet the details of each of these goals, policies, and programs in a public setting, and then vet them through the City Council so that we can actually get more detailed things. I'm not talking about wordsmithing, but in some sense, some sort of way of getting more focused details that translate that down to the nitty-gritty as opposed to the broad brush that will be harder. That will be the broad brush easier to do at our Palo Alto process. The details are harder to do. Excuse me? Do you want to respond to that?
I think that there is probably a variety of strategies we can use in order to coalesce and comments that we receive throughout this process. And we are going to receive a lot of input. We are going to receive a lot of comments, and staff will be challenged to determine what to do with those comments. And then, as you mentioned, not only how do we translate those into perhaps revisions to our version 1.0 policy document, but I think more importantly, how to translate those into alternative futures that might be reviewed in the draft EIR. We're going to be talking with a lot of people who may not be able to describe what medium growth is or low growth is, and people may have different concepts of that. So I think we're going to be challenged to really listen to the community and interpret what they're saying to develop these alternative scenarios. And I think along with those alternative scenarios, we may have to adjust our comp plan policies and programs and have that vetted out in some public forum, as you suggest. So perhaps it does make sense for the Planning and Transportation Commission to hold sessions next year to review how our version 1.0 document has changed and modified over the previous months.
Thank you. And to the extent that we're considering alternatives, in some sense, it may make sense sometime between the scoping discussions that happen in May, July, and August to have some sort of, I'm not sure how this fits in, but some sort of way of describing what the alternatives are. and I'm not sure whether that's as part of the council discussions on in June 20th, 3rd, or August 4th, or whether you assimilate that and then have another process in a checkpoint in between where we say, here are the alternatives that we're going to consider and vet those and then evaluate that further on. But that might be an appropriate checkpoint to think about during the summer in that regard, and I'm not sure the degree to which that's a council process or a planning commission process or both. And finally, I think that there was a discussion some time ago in the comp plan modification process to think about how to handle sustainability. And there was a consideration as to whether sustainability should be its own chapter or whether sustainability should be sprinkled throughout the rest of the comp plan and integrated with the rest of the comp plan. As a way of handling that, I would suggest that since we did decide to put it sprinkled throughout the rest of the comp plan, it may be useful to take the sustainability components, parts, if we the GPPs of that are sustainability in the other elements, and provide an index of all of those. And that's going to be useful in the end, and it should be in the published version of the comp plan, just showing all the sustainability as well as cross references and stuff like that. But I think it will be also useful as the city embarks on updating the climate protection plan and considers possibility of creating a climate adaptation plan, figuring out what kinds of things, making sure that the sustainability changes that are incorporated throughout the comp plan are sufficiently complete in that process. So I think that index will be helpful in that. So I would encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Any last words for us?
No, just thank you very much for your comments and your time. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. So the next meeting of the Commission is going to be on May 14th, 2014. We have a full agenda. I will not be able to attend that meeting. Vice Chair Keller will act as chair of the meeting, and Commissioner Tanaka will be acting vice chair. For our commission representatives and liaisons, thanks to Carl King for being the liaison to council during the month of April. For May, I may volunteer myself to be the liaison, although I'm not available the week of May 12th, as perhaps someone else would be able to attend the May 12th meeting.
We'll see if there's anything on the agenda.
If there's anything on the agenda that relates to planning, I will coordinate that with Vice Chair Keller. And then we can have reports from our subcommittees and representatives. Vice Chair Keller represented the PTC at the most recent meeting of the Regional Housing Mandate Committee. Perhaps you'd like to give us a very quick update on anything of interest from that meeting?
Yes. I don't have my notes in front of me, but recalling roughly, there were discussions about the prioritization of the housing inventory site list and what the order of those were, and there were issues also about the density of the Fry's site. And that also comes up with when we move forward, California Avenue will consider the Fry's site. I actually went through our minutes. We actually talked about mixed use, but we didn't specifically talk about what the mixed use density in FAR was about that. So I think that was maybe more notional than the 2.0 FAR that was in the document. So I think that's an interesting question, and may come forward when the council considers that further.
We've also heard this evening some comments about our Palo Alto process and outreach to the community on the different things, including the housing element. There's a community leader group dealing with that, or a community panel on the housing element, and Greg Tanaka is representing us on that. Do you have an update for us on your progress?
Sure. So we had a meeting last Thursday, well attended. Basically, just going over a lot of things that we went over. So we heard some feedback from the public. Nothing ground shaking, nothing that we haven't actually talked about before. But I thought it was a good discussion. Not too different from the ones that we've had. Actually, I also attended the Alto as well. So that was also I thought that was a very very good meeting as well.
Okay. We need to, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the minutes of April 9th, 2014 meeting. Would someone like to make that motion? Commissioner Tanaka making the motion to approve the minutes. Is there a second? Commissioner King seconded. All in favor? Okay, it's unanimous, 4-0, with Chair Michael abstaining because he was not at the meeting. Any further announcements from staff or esteemed council that we should hear before we adjourn?
I think Commissioner Keller requested the announcement that the City Council will be conducting interviews for the 2 open Planning Commissioner vacancies on their meeting this Monday, May 5th.
No.
May 7th?
Wednesday, May 7th, is a special meeting from 6 to 7 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, at 8:21 p.m., the meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission is adjourned.